This is one of the center places of influence, and think about that. God plants this church here really close to Prague University, and Huss ends up preaching in this church, and this causes the ideas of the Reformation to spread out throughout Europe 100 years before Luther comes along. So Huss is born in July of 1373. And Huss does the usual thing. He goes to the university. He then starts to teach at the university. As he's teaching in the university, he gets to the point where he's noticed by the king, who is Wenceslas at this point. And that's not from the Christmas tune. That's from a Wenceslas that was from the 12th century. But it's an ancestor of his. And then in 1402, because he gets noticed by Wenceslas, he ends up getting appointed to preach at the Bethlehem Chapel, which is what our next location is. Bethlehem Chapel is a place which brings to mind the personality of Huss and the Hussite period of the Czech history. The foundations of the Czech Reform movement were laid here. In Bohemia, the direction of reform is linked with Charles University, founded in 1348 by Charles IV in Prague, where Master Jan Hus was a rector after the year 1409. Bethlehem Chapel was founded in 1391 in Prague. Both donors stipulated that the chapel should be used for sermons delivered in Czech. It's a big deal, right, that it's delivered in Czech. One of the ways that the Roman Catholic Church kept their power is that starting in 400, with the translation into the Vulgate in Latin, they started to enforce all sermons had to be given in Latin, which meant that the people couldn't understand. Waldo comes along in, say, 1200 or 1190 and says, no, they should be preached in the native tongue. And here in 1391, when they established the chapel, this is the influence of Waldo coming up, that they're still preaching in Czech. And when they pay for this, and this is expensive, but when they pay for this, one of the conditions is that the sermons always have to be in Czech. So again, see the flow. God is working. God has all the dots connected, and he's drawing it out, and he's drawing out the dots. Prague University was one of like 2 or 3 biggest universities in the 14th century. This was not a minor university. You have the Sorbonne in Paris, you have this, you maybe have Oxford. There's just a few universities that really have a lot of power and influence. And so this is one of the center places of influence. And think about that. God plants this church here really close to Prague University. And Huss ends up preaching in this church, and he's a rector at Prague University. And this causes the ideas of the Reformation to spread out throughout Europe 100 years before Luther comes along. Luther is not coming to untilled ground. He's coming to ground that was already tilled. Even though the Reformation hadn't sprung up, he's coming to ground that was already tilled, and it was tilled through what's happening at Prague University. Bethlehem Chapel has never been a parish church. Although very large, it has always been considered as a chapel. It was exceptional that it was the largest meeting place for the people, holding 3,000 people. Here ideas found expression, which until that time could be only a subject of scientific debate in the Charles University. The second basic significance of the chapel acquired only in the year 1402 when Master Jan Hus became preacher. So Huss, right, he starts to teach at the university. Wenceslas recognizes him, hears about him, so that he appoints him to be the pastor here. So he starts to preach here in 1402. The sermons won great renown. Queen Sophia, the wife of King Wenceslas IV, attended some of them. He's probably saved by his own preaching, which is kind of an interesting thing. But he preaches, he opens the word, and he starts to preach from scriptures. He hasn't been taught from scriptures because that's not what's really taught. He's taught intellectualism, right? This is the Renaissance, and he's being affected by those kind of ideas that are stirring up. It hasn't come to fruition yet, but they're being stirred up. And so he starts to preach and say that the Word of God is supreme because, again, that's what Bohemia is thinking, because Bohemia has been affected. And so when Huss comes here, he starts to preach, and he preaches from the Word of God, and he gets more and more convicted, and somewhere in there is probably when he was saved. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and share it with your friends. You can also visit www.discerninghistory.com for more videos and other resources.